Hello and welcome to another episode of Classic Topology Problems. In this episode I'll be covering making things too complex. So one of the benefits of working polygons is that you can make things quite simple. So for example, let's say that I want to make some sort of shelf at the corner. So I'm going to apply a poly. I'm just going to delete this. I'm going to flip the polygons. Alright, so we got this. Let's say I want to make some sort of, this is like a bathroom for example. And we want to make some sort of little shelf here in the corner where you can store your shampoo and your soap and your moisturizers and things like that. So what I would do in this case is I would just insert some loops as a starting point. So maybe something like this. Then for example, I could select these and maybe detach them as a clone. And this will be a good starting place, for example. Then I could apply a shell modifier and just apply a poly right on top and just kind of move this out like so. So as you can see, I'm keeping it very simple here. I can even just remove these real quick here. Alright, and remove this as well. Alright, so I can then, for example, use creases. And I'm going to crease, I'm going to press Ctrl A to select everything. I'm going to deselect this single edge. And I'm going to give it just a maximum crease right here. I can apply open subdiv. And we can turn off Iceland display. So pretty much what I can then do to get the shape that I want is just to move this single edge, these two vertices. Now I can pretty much get this kind of shelf right here. So you can see in this situation, I was able to keep things super simple and still get the result that I want. Because now I have this very simple object, and to adjust it, all I have to do is just move this single edge here, and there we go. If I were to apply a poly on top of this, I would now be in a situation where I'm making things too complex. So now in order to adjust this, I have to select this, and notice that that doesn't work, so I have to pretty much select all of this, and you can see how it just becomes a lot more difficult to adjust this. So in this situation, in many situations, in order to make things easier for yourself with polygons, keep things as simple as possible and only make them complex when they need to be. Now, in this situation, you don't actually want it to be this simple, because if you actually keep your object this simple and you unwrap this and subdivide it and create a texture for it, the texture you create will be warped and distorted when subdivision occurs. Because essentially you're trying to turn a square into a round shape. There's going to be a lot of texture distortion happening around here. So let's say you've got some kind of wear and tear and different kind of damages. If this is made out of wood, for example, there's going to be a lot of texture distortion when you subdivide it. So in this situation here, what you can do is use this simple thing for modeling. Once you're ready to actually unwrap it and texture it, then you will go in here and maybe set it to be, maybe not 3, maybe for example 2. And then you can just, I'm going to remove these loops. And so what you can do is, if you're going to use support loops, you can just insert loops through here. Or what you can do is just select all these polygons. And so in order to get a loop going around here, we don't really want this kind of topology. We want it to be a loop around here. We're going to just inset right here. And so we're going to get this nice topology going around here. So this would be what you want to actually unwrap and texture, because now that we've established some curvature here, when you texture and subdivide this, it's not going to have that same extreme level of texture distortion that happens when it's too simple. So pretty much keep your meshes as simple as you can, and when you're ready to unwrap and texture it, make sure that there's a little bit of a curve here to minimize texture distortion. Another example is that if I, let's say, create a plane, or actually I can just use this one. And so let's say I'm trying to create some sort of sci-fi detail here. So what I would do is just select this and then just bevel this and get this. I'm going to now open subdiv, and I'm going to grow this. Hold shift and click here to convert to the border edges to get this, and I'm going to give this a crease here. So number one, this is probably too simple. Let me increase the division here. So you see we get this kind of oval happening here. So in this case, we actually do need 2 loops running through here. And a little bit of a pinch. And now we get this shape that I want right here. So this is without and this is with. So we definitely need 2 loops running through here like so. But this mesh right here is too simple, because once we subdivide this, there's going to be a lot of distortion happening here if we texture this. For example, if we go into Substance Painter or something else and add a bunch of scratches to this, it's going to look really bad because we're going to turn pretty much this square shape into this round shape. So before we unwrap and texture this, we need to go in here and maybe have 1 or 2 levels of subdivision here. Maybe something like this, for example. And of course, to avoid this from happening, we want to make sure there's some loops going around here as well. So sometimes you use loops not for necessarily sharpening things up, but just to kind of minimize any kind of distortions that could be happening. So you would then actually subdivide to 1 or 2 levels, and then you will actually unwrap and texture this right here. All right, another example is that, let's say I'm trying to model a ceiling fan blade. So I'm going to go ahead and center this. And I'm going to go ahead and start with just one length and width segment here. So to show the contrast of modeling something simple versus modeling something too complex, what I can do is just clone this out here. And in order to begin modeling the shape, what you can do is just use the cut tool, and you can start doing a bunch of cuts here to kind of get this shape. So let's say something like that. And I can apply symmetry as well. But because I've made all these cuts, I now have a lot more cleanup work to do, and I have to control all these vertices basically. So now I have to use the cut tool and pretty much clean everything up. And that's going to be a lot more work. Now what you can also do is, for example, you can just start with a plane that's more complex here. So for example, a lot more segments through here. And then you will have to do a lot more work just to kind of reposition everything. Right, so these are kind of methods, these are kind of examples of having to do more work. However, if you just keep things as simple as possible, and so now I can just, for example, make a very few amount of cuts. Alright, now all I have to do is just fix a little bit. So this mesh right here is an example of a mesh that is not too complex, but is complex enough to allow us to edit things without getting overwhelmed. So I can easily, for example, edit this. And you can see it's not too difficult. I just have to select a few points at a time, and I can get different shapes going on here. So to avoid bad subdivision, you may want to insert a few loops. Once you're done modeling, once you're done with the correct shapes, with the correct vertices in the right place, then you can insert some loops just for better subdivision, just to avoid these long polygons. And then you can call this right here done, for example. And so you would not need to add any additional complexity to this unless the model needs it. So another example is that if I create a box right here, and then let's say I will bevel it and get this. Alright, so this mesh is simple enough for us to edit. And we got this kind of nice control. However, once we're ready to actually unwrap this, we want to go with, let's say, 1 iteration, maybe 2. However, another reason to go to higher iterations if you want to add some details. So for example, if I want to add some sort of hole right here, let me just clone this out. So if it's too simple, what's going to happen is that, let's say I create a cylinder and I'll give it, let's say, 8 sides, and I'll just put it right over here. Right, and then I can, let's say, for example, move this down. Alright, and I'm going to just boolean this away from here. Alright, you can see now I'm going to have trouble finding additional points to connect this to, because now if I start, for example, fixing this up and using things like cut, I have to do a lot of cutting and fixing up to get rid of this issue. And it's also going to ruin the curvature, because now that I've got all these additional loops going through here, we're not going to have the same curvature anymore. It's going to be a lot sharper here. So before we add this kind of detail, we want to establish our curvature. And now it'll be much easier to add that kind of detail there. And also, when you have a lot more detail, you don't even need to use Boolean if you don't want to. What you can also do is just, for example, select this. And then, for example, grow, face constraints, use the regularizer script. And you can see we get this nice detail without even needing to Boolean this. So simply keep your mesh as simple as possible until it's time to unwrap it. Then if your mesh is too blocky, feel free to subdivide it so that you get the more curvature. Then you can properly unwrap and subdivide it without texture distortion. So simply just keep things as simple as possible for as long as you can. Thank you for watching and take care.